Hi, so I'm going to be doing my oral presentation on society in Sherman Alexi's The Exaggeration of Despair. So, getting started, I chose society for this poem because something that I spoke about a lot in my in my paper was kind of this juxtaposition between, our normal society versus Sherman Alexi's reservation and indigenous society. So I wanted to speak on that, and that's why I use society. And so with this poem, you kind of have to reach outside of the box with themes because outside of obviously despair and anguish, uh, everything else is kind of just to be thought about from your own perspective because the this poem does not provide a lot of context. Though it just gets started right away and just goes into these different scenarios, so it's not really much backstory or context or anything else. So in my paper, I spoke about um, the society I spoke about was these forgotten, unnamed people going through daily terror and just the darkness that surrounds them and is at his door every day when he says I open the door and just sees all of these different people and scenarios. And one thing I spoke about in my story was, in my paper was, um, I spoke about how also the Native Americans are, because of their situation and just the darkness, they have become disconnected from themselves. And I spoke about a line in here is, and this Indian child cries when he sits at our table because he had never known his own family to sit at the same table. So what Sherman Alexie is writing about here is how this unnamed Indian child is crying because he's experiencing something that he's never experienced with his own family, and he's like, I didn't realize families did this, and so this is Native American disconnect is something that has occurred just due to their situation in some families, and I spoke about this because this is one thing for their society, but in our society, what I mentioned is that most of us can name countless times where we've all came together as a family and sat together and shared a nice experience and ate together, just like at Thanksgiving. And I thought this was a good time to mention how in this past Thanksgiving, most of us, because of COVID, maybe not, but a lot of us were still with our families and enjoying time with our families, whether it was, physical or virtual. But the point is, while we're doing that, we're not thinking about what indigenous society may be going through on that day. We don't think about, oh, what are they doing on this day? Because we're wrapped up in our own life, in our own society, and what we don't think about is how our experience right now for Thanksgiving is something completely different for these people, because I'm sure that they are not celebrating Thanksgiving, which is based around the person who pretty much started their despair. Um, and so that's something in society that I wanted to talk about, just the comparing and contrasting of their society and our society. And I think that Sherman Alexie, um, so him being an indigenous writer, yeah, he grew up on the reservation. And so what he's talking about in this book is, while it may be an exaggeration, and this isn't what every single Native American is going through, and obviously it isn't all, I'm sure that it's not all terrible and anguish and just darkness on the reservation, but these are some real life experiences that some indigenous people do go through on the reservation. And that is what he's talking about here, whether or not it's to an exaggerated extent. These are still situations that some people have gone through. And he even mentions his own situations with his grandfather and his grandmother and his own father and his own sister. So while he's also talking about strangers and forgotten and unnamed stranger situations and what they may be going through, he also is discussing his own situation. So that is his society against our society. And so that's pretty much what I spoke about in my paper. And that's what I wanted to talk about. And I also went into mental illness on reservations, and one of my articles in here spoke about Native American teens being at a higher risk of committing suicide and mental illness just because of their situation. And yes, so that's pretty much what my paper was about. I thought it was really interesting for him to kind of make a poem so unique. That's why this poem jumped out at me. That's why I wanted to do my paper on it, because I thought it was so unique and just it really grabs your attention right from the start. It just jumps in, and he kind of pulls no punches. He talks about suicide. He talks about rape. He talks about just a bunch of different real life issues that his society has to go through. And yeah, so that's why I wanted to make my paper on this poem. So that was Society and the Exaggeration of Despair.